Hi, it's Veli from Greenwood Academy. I'm really proud to announce our first ever podcast called The Green Room. Our plan is every second Thursday to launch a brand new episode of a renewable energy subject close and near and dear to your heart. First off the rank is our very own Aaron Fina, big brain, polymath, and he just so happens to be our health and safety officer. We're going to be talking JSAs and SWMS, and if you don't know what they are, stay tuned. Welcome to the Green Room. This is the inaugural, hopefully I pronounced that correctly, podcast where we talk about all things renewable energy. Solar, wind, microhydro, flywheels, or even other unusual storage technology. Anything to do with renewables, this is what we're here to do. I'm here with the incomparable, and I'll use that word because it's true, Mr. Aaron, our HSEQ. My name's Veli. I'm not going to introduce myself because I'm not important in this podcast. It's actually all about Aaron and his knowledge, and we're specifically going to be talking about SWMS, JSAs, and their connection and their relevance to large-scale renewable energy projects. But Aaron, can you give us a bit of an intro, who you are, what you do, not your star sign, we're not interested in that.
No bank balance details, no bank account details.
Not at this point in time.
Okay, no worries, Valley. Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me down in the room. It's awesome. First time. I should feel fairly privileged, I think, being one of the first people down here being interviewed. I'm the HSE guy from Greenwood. So, I've been doing HSE for a long time. The list is long and distinguished as to where I've worked. So I've worked in oil and gas, large-scale electrical energy, large-scale contractors, heavy industry, government, regulator, worked for myself, done waste-to-energy stuff. So I've been around. I've got a long list of places that I've worked in. I've got lots of knowledge and experience in seeing what's happened. Seeing what's been good and what's been not so good. So yeah.
From a personal perspective, I mean, safety. It's not really a broad term, or is it? And look, I'll preface with what I'm about to say. With this, what does safety mean to you from a personal perspective?
There's so many different angles on it, but from me personally, it means that, and it's going to sound simple, but it's just nobody gets hurt, and that's the short answer. No one should go to work and come home different, worse, I should say, because if you come home better, that's a good thing, but if you come home worse, that's not a good thing, and that's what safety is about. It's making sure that everyone has the opportunity to go to work, do their job, and not be injured or damaged, physically, psychologically, emotionally, any way like that, so that they can come home and they can enjoy their life, because that's really why we go to work for, isn't it? It's not for we go to work because, we're there to work. We go to work because we're enjoying life, and it's part of our life. So you've got to be able to enjoy life as it goes through.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because from a safety perspective, it's not only the employee and what happens to them, it's also their relatives, their loved ones, their friends who can get affected. So it's not just the insular thing, is it?
No, I call it like the ripple effect. It's like throwing a stone in the pond. Like you throw it in the middle of the pond, someone gets hurt at work, but the ripples go all the way out and bang into the shore. So the footprint that anything going wrong has is huge. So it's so important for basically, families, humanity, society, that, people don't get hurt at work. You just think about it. Someone gets badly hurt at work, it's not just them, it's their family, their friends, their communities that they help, say they're a CFA firefighter, then they can't do that anymore. All of a sudden the community's down one for something that, should have been able to be prevented. So that's where I sort of look at it, and it's not just this single little incident sort of thing there. So that's the important thing, is it's just the footprint that it has all over the place,
As an HSEQ, and look, it's an acronym, and we are in an industry where there's a lot of acronyms. What does it actually mean, HSEQ? And am I saying is the Q?
No. There's lots of different ways that you can talk about it. It's occupational health and safety, OH&S, WHS, workplace health and safeties, HSEQ, health, safety, environment and quality, which is what I do at Greenwood. So I manage I shouldn't say I manage. I have input into all of those areas
You
within the company.
manage, you
No. I input. I guide. I do this. I don't manage because it's a joint thing. There's no such thing with safety that it's one person's responsibility. Like everything, everybody has a role in how it successfully happens in an organisation. It's not just me. Like if I don't do my job, the place is unsafe. Or if I do my job, the place is safe. That doesn't work that way. It's everybody has a role in it. So it's like that thing of working together, the collective. And, when we work together and aim for doing the things right for safety, environmental protection or quality, we're better than the sum of our parts. So, the company's much better if everyone's working towards it. So, yeah.
So what is the ultimate goal? I think I know the answer, but what is the ultimate goal of an HSEQ person?
Me, if you talk to me, it's
I'm
for
talking
me.
to you.
For me, it's not to have a job. And this is going to sound funny, but it becomes ingrained in the way that the organisation does it all. So you don't need a specific person to do health and safety. Everybody does it as part of their normal role. It's part of your normal frontal lobe. It's the things that you do automatically. So that to me is the ultimate goal for me. It's like I do myself out of a job, I can go and do something else because everyone understands safety, everyone understands environment, everyone understands quality, all the processes and procedures are in there. Everyone knows what they've got to do. Everyone wants to do it. They identify things that aren't going well. They bring across what's going well and improve upon it so that you don't need a person where it all has to go through.
So it really is a case of you're an educator effectively.
Yes. I'm an influencer and an educator. I influence people and I educate people as to what they need to do.
You've been HSEQ at other companies.
Yep.
Has there been any sort of like fatalities that you've seen that in other industries, and how? I mean, I know it's a personal question.
Yeah.
How did that and how has that affected you? And yeah,
I've been involved in investigations into fatalities as part of my previous roles, and I've had to talk to the families left behind to interview them to find out whether there were external circumstances that then caused the accidents as part of a proper investigation, because you're looking at all the things that could have caused it. So you can't just look at what's in the workplace because, we're humans. Anything, something can cause a problem to us that then makes us do something different, unusual. So I've talked to those people about it and seen the impacts that a workplace fatality has on people. I've been on sites where I've seen things go wrong and it never leaves you. It's something that you carry with you for the rest of your life. And it's, is it traumatic? Yes. Does it live with you? Yes. Does it change you? Absolutely, because you want to do everything within your power not to go through that again, but also not to have anyone else go through that, because it's terrible. You question yourself, was there anything else I could have done to stop that from happening? It could have been me. There's a whole lot of things. What happens if my son did the same job and he was in that situation? Would he have been as lucky as me not to have been hurt? So there's a whole lot of stuff that then grabs you and makes you start to think differently about the way you do it. So you want to then start helping people, because then you turn around and go, well, if I'm worried about my son, shouldn't we be worried about other people's sons and daughters and family and everything else? So it has that cascading effect. So, it's not good to have bad accidents, but, you have to learn from them, and it makes you better. It has to make you stronger and better from having the things happen around you. So,
It's pretty sobering. Like as you're talking, I'm thinking of various things. What advice would you have to someone who is in your position, your role at a company, and they're having issues with the whole balance between the economic reality driven by the owner of the business,
yep,
and maintaining these optimum situations where people are coming home? I mean, have you yourself ever experienced
of course
that conflict or that? Yeah,
that conflict exists everywhere, and it's the same. It's no different to anything else. It's like you might want to do something, but the business has got a different drive, opinion, set of drivers to do things. So it's no different to any other part of the business. Where you've got competing, desires, wants, needs, or anything else. The issue with safety is, of course, we're dealing with people's for want of a better word, lives. You know, we can change somebody's life. So that's that thing that you sort of got to keep reminding people that, you know, we do this. Just because it hasn't happened before doesn't mean that it can't happen again. There's something that, you know, the HSE crowd always loves to use, which is positive reinforcement of a negative behaviour. You know, we take a shortcut and all of a sudden you get the job done quicker. So therefore, taking the shortcut becomes a good thing, whereas it's not, because it's not following the right rules or not following everything else. So you've just got to be careful about that sort of stuff and educate people about the whole fact that, yeah, you might have got a good benefit from doing something a different way, but have you assessed all those things? Have you made sure that it is right, rather than just jumping that way without thinking through everything? So it's typically not about jumping up and down, about saying, oh, you know, you've got to spend X, Y, Z, or, you know, you're competing with money and, oh, we don't know, we need a new truck, we can't afford new harnesses, or, you know, something along those lines. It's all about, let's educate you and talk about all the different benefits and the risks and everything else, because everything's a decision made by people. So you have to sit there and influence people and talk about, you know, the benefits, the yin and the yang. You know, there's always a plus and a minus to everything you do. So it's like, yep, you do this, but then don't forget you're taking a risk, you know, and not all risks are bad. You know, risks can be good and bad, but, you know, if you're not providing people with the right safety gear, you know, worst case, somebody will get killed on your watch. You know, that's terrifying. You know, best case, you can hold off for 6 months, you know, and you can grow, you know, like, but there's a risk. You do that, it's like everything. There's a risk and a reward. So you've just got to lay everything down on the table and inform everybody, and then people make an informed decision.
We'll talk about this in a bit more detail, the legal liability and ramifications. But as you were talking, I'd like to ask the question, as well as thinking about the legal ramifications, we should all be thinking about the moral ramifications as well, shouldn't we?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, safety is a moral thing, because what you do is, the way I look at it is, put yourself in the other person's shoes. How would you feel if someone did something that made you get hurt? Is that cool? And you then look at that from that moralistic point of view, you know, like, if I don't want that to happen to me, then how do I impose that on somebody else? And that's just a normal, you know, human nature sort of thing that you do as a person.
That's if you've got empathy, though.
That's right. But then, you know, we'll talk about it and you go, well, if you've got a sociopath in charge of the business, then, you know, you've got no empathy. So that's where you're going into those paths. So there's all the other things with, you know, dealing with human nature and society and everything else. So you've got to weigh all that up. But from a point of view, from an individual, I'd turn around and go, would I be comfortable on the receiving end of this? You know, so if someone did this, how would I feel, you know, with that? It's like you cut someone off in traffic because you're running late. That's okay, you know, because you've got to get somewhere where you need to go. But how do you feel when someone else cuts you off? You know, there's that yin and the yang. We've got to start looking at the world, you know, the way that we put our footprints on the world, through other people's eyes, not just our own.
I think that's good advice for everyone and for society in general. I mean, that's a conversation for another time. We could wax lyrical for hours on that one. That's great.
I was going to say, we've gone fairly deep and fairly away, but safety is one of those things that it's not prescriptive. You know, the laws turn around and say you have an obligation as a person on a work site, a business owner, whatever that, to provide the work site to be as safe as possible, you know, and that's what you've got to do. So how do you do that? That's an obligation for you to go, well, what's as safe as possible? So you've got to make those decisions.
From a legal perspective, and again, we'll delve into this a little bit later on in detail, do you think it's a good idea, and this is a bit of a loaded question, to actually go above and beyond what the minimum requirements are? Or is it depending on the task? Because I'm talking from the perspective of, say, electrical standards. Yep. You shall have a switchboard, you shall use these cables and this size, but you can always go a little bit better. What do you think?
The law is such that that's what you've got to do to maintain the standard of everything in the world. So like they set a minimum standard to make sure that whatever you do is fit for purpose. So that's what the law says, and that's why we have standards and everything else, because that then guarantees a certain performance. There's nothing in the law that says you can't go above and beyond. And that then becomes a decision, benefits and risks, you know, the yin and the yang of what you're doing. Now, you look at something, you make something that's okay, you sell X of them. You make something that's exceptional, that goes above and beyond, you might sell more. You might be able to charge more. There's various reasons for all sorts of stuff. Personally, I always look for the best that you can go to from a safety point of view, because there might be a minimum standard, but if there's an opportunity to go better, why wouldn't you? If it, and you weigh it up, like, there's that thing as a thing in HSE called a LARP, as low as reasonably practicable.
Right.
So that's where the decision-making process is. So in a lot of safety, a lot of it isn't prescribed. It's you've got to demonstrate that you're down as low as reasonably practicable in a lot of safety stuff. Or, there's that sort of definition, and it's not used everywhere, but that's the intent of it. So you turn around and go, it's your best efforts to make it safe. So that you turn around and go, can we make something able to withstand a 20-ton concrete block falling on top of you? Yes, you can, but it costs $20 million. Then no one will pay that, because the chance of that happening is very low. So you start to work out from a risk-based determination what the level that you go to is. So there might be the standards, but because of the circumstances, you might need to go more. There might be circumstances where you go, okay, the standard's okay. That's all right. But you should always look at those things going forwards, and that's in everything you do. Like a lot of the time, it's the standard is this price. You want to go above the standard, it costs you more. Then that's the person who's getting the thing made, built, installed, whatever. They go, well, do I want to pay more money to future-proof it, or do I want to have it here? So again, it's the same sort of question as everything else. It's loaded for every part of the world and every part of society. Do you do what's required, or do you go above and beyond? And then you weigh it up and you go, can I afford to go above and beyond? It's like my dad said, when you're buying a set of tools, always buy the best you can. And that depends upon how much money you've got and what you need it for.
Yeah, there's a cost-benefit analysis that's not
Correct.
necessarily purely financial. There is so many things. What I always like to say is, when if you're dealing with the most precious commodity, which is our time, everything should flow from that. Now, we're in a situation at Greenwood where we're doing a lot bigger projects, and if our predictions are correct, we'll be doing even bigger projects. How important is it for a company, no matter what size they are, to actually really set up those processes and procedures as properly as possible right at the beginning, in your opinion?
I think setting up the processes and procedures up the front is the only way you can successfully do stuff. And we all know that things change on site. So, like you can't plan for everything that's going to happen on site, but you set up the processes and procedures as much as you can, and then set up the processes and procedures to deal with the changes that that are going to happen on site, so that you can cope with what you can see. So everything that you can identify on site with the processes and procedures, you set them up front early. So that's my way of setting up a business. As much as you can, front load the work.
And there's still, and we haven't mentioned the specific documents, but they're still living documents. Yep. Now, I'd like to go to some definitions, because this is one thing that I've always had a bit of trouble with, and we've got SWMS and versus JSA, or maybe I shouldn't say versus.
A SWMS is, in Australia, under the legislative definition, is a safe work method statement. So that's SWMS. And that's called into play by the occupational health and safety legislations around Australia to be used for high-risk construction work. So there's a specific space that you do that you have to have a SWMS for. So that's what it is. So like there's a legislative requirement as to where you have to have a SWMS, and all of the legislations define what high-risk construction work is. And, Victoria and Canberra have, I think it's 19, and all the rest of the states have 18. So there's different numbers of the definitions that they have, because there's like 18 or 19 different points as to what these actual things that the hazards are that you have to then write a SWMS for. So that's what it is. So that's what a SWMS, the definition of a SWMS is, and that's when they're legally called into play.
And then you've got what they call a JSA, which is another acronym, and we know why people use acronyms, is so they can appear to look smart. The reality is they're abbreviations of word. Actually, they're the first letter of a word. So a JSA, what's a JSA?
A JSA, or the term's changing now to JSEA. So you've got job safety analysis, which is a JSA, or job safety environmental analysis. So, you turn around with those. So there again, another risk assessment. So again, it's applied to a task that you're doing on the site, and you look for identifying the hazards around that task on the site, and then the controls. But it can cover anything you do. So like a JSA is a bit of a broader thing. So there's overlap between SWMS and JSEAs. They look at the same things, but there's certain things in one and not the other.
Again, the old JSA, SWMS and standard operating procedures, they're obviously a relationship between all three. And as you said, if you're doing any high-risk work, you definitely have to have a SWMS.
Yep.
But do you have to have a JSA?
Not for the high-risk work part, but if there's other tasks around there, then yes, you should. Because don't forget, when you're doing work on a site, you've got other bits and pieces that go on. So the high-risk works are just around these risks that you've got with the legislation definition. So like, falling of greater than 2 metres or, working in a tunnel or diving. So they're the things that you need to have a SWMS for. But if you're doing a whole lot of other stuff around the outside of that, then you don't necessarily need to have a JSA. You don't need to have a SWMS, but you need to have a JSEA or something along that lines where it identifies the hazards and the risks associated with the task you're doing on the work site and what you're going to do to control them. So you can have the two together because you've got different parts going on, or you can write it all into, you could conceivably write it all into one document and cover a SWMS and a JSEA in one document. You can write that because you can have it so that you've got your SWMS part, but then you've got your JSEA part, which is around the task that's not covered by the SWMS, but you're still looking at the hazards and that around that, but you just don't have one of those high risk construction work activity risks associated with it.
Okay.
So there's a whole lot of things that then leads to a whole lot of problems with people writing SWMS in the future that we'll talk about later when we talk about what are the common errors that you see with SWMS. But that's where you start to go down that path.
I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, actually this is an opinion-based thing. I'd say that having them combined is probably not a good idea because they're two separate things with a connection, and I think the message would be possibly diluted if they're all in the one doc, or is that not a valid assessment?
Well, it depends on how you communicate it too, because don't forget, go back to what the intent of all these documents is. Make the workplace safer. So if you have your SWMS or combined document written the right way where it goes through and it does everything else, it identifies the hazards, identifies what the risks are, then has the controls, and then, works out the controls to make sure that it's safer and all the other stuff associated with that. If you have that all in one document, that could work for your organisation. It might not, it might. So realistically, you've got to look at it from what's on the site, who are the work parties, everything else, like most things, and decide what works for you and your work party. And that's with consultation with the work party. So, you're making sure that you do it in the supervisors and everything else.
At what stage of the project, and I mean this might be a simplistic question, but at what stage of the project should the SWMS actually be introduced?
From a point of view of when you're developing the SWMS or when you're using the SWMS? Or
when you're using the SWMS. Or you're developing them based on previous experience with similar tasks.
That's right.
But obviously SWMS should be modified for each project.
Yeah.
So when do they actually come into play?
So the SWMS have to be reviewed, and this is by the work party, before the task actually starts. So you shouldn't be starting, and this is a big shouldn't, so this is like one of those mandatory words under the law. You should not be starting work
but
doing
should's not a shall, though.
No, but okay, well then if you want to go down the real legal definition, then we'll start dancing with the law. And if you go through it, one must have a SWMS in place that has been reviewed by the work party and all of them acknowledged and everything else and signed on before they start that task.
Now, when you're creating SWMS, are you getting the input? You're obviously getting the input of people who are qualified from the perspective, in our case, A grades.
Yep.
Do you necessarily have to get input from the A grade on that particular project, or?
As in,
that's a hard question.
No, I was going to say, I'm trying to clarify what you're asking. If you're talking about the development of the SWMS, you need to have the experts involved. So you need to have the SMEs. So I'm not smart enough to be an A grade. I'm not smart enough to do a lot of those things on site. So me writing a SWMS would not be an ideal SWMS because I don't know how to do those jobs. I don't know the hazards and the risks that are associated specifically with the task and the equipment that they're going to use and all those hazards. So you've got to have them up front involved. You've got to have them as part of that consultation when you're developing SWMS.
Yep, okay.
And then when you go out to site with the SWMS that you're then, and this is where we're talking about generic SWMS too, and this is the two things where this is something else.
This is what I'm leading to.
Yeah, that's what I mean. You're leading to the generic SWMS, which is something that a lot of the organisations say, no, you can have them, because a lot of people are saying, well, can I do a generic SWMS and have a SWMS? Because they're designed for high risk work activities that you're doing regularly. So like, a construction company that does demolition every day, you write your generic SWMS for the demolition up front, and then you have it go out on site, and then you have the work party with all the subject matter experts doing the tasks, reviewing the SWMS and adding anything that's required on that site that's different from inside the generic stuff on that SWMS review at the start of the task, where they then go, yep, we've gone through all this. This is the things that need to be changed, and then they sign on to it. So you have the experts involved. You've got to have the experts, the knowledgeable individuals at both points. One at the development of the generic SWMS, or if you're developing the SWMS on site, which is legal, you've got to have those people involved at that time too. So worst case, you can go out there and all of a sudden have something crop up that you need to deal with. And it's high risk work activity because you've got to fall from heights, say. You can write a SWMS on the site before you do the task. That's legal as well, because you've got to have the SWMS developed, authorised, signed by the work party and everything else, all before you start the work. So you could do all that in the hour or two before the job.
Yeah, right.
Or you can do the development work in a workshop back in the office and then carry them out, and all you have to do on the sites, because you're doing it, the 20 different sites that you're working on over the next 6 months, you then just personalise them as they go forward. But you've then got to make sure you've got a continuous feedback loop, so that if there's any improvements, it goes back and then the SWMS gets updated.
Okay, does that same logic and structure apply to JSAs, or are JSAs more?
A JSA is a task-specific thing, so you do that right on the site.
Yes,
at the thing. They both do the same thing, but a JSA is very much, I'm about to do the task on the site, so you do your JSA up front as you're sitting there about to start using your grinder or do whatever it is. So you do your JSA on the site. That's where the JSA forms are typically a lot more empty than a SWMS. It just has add task you're doing, identify hazards, what are the risks, rate them, controls. Whereas a JSA has, what you're doing because you're working on the roof. So you list your task thing, installing solar panels on a roof. So that's the task that then has the hazard for high risk construction, which is fall from over 2 meters. So then you can have that, and you can have the initial controls, because you turn around and go, well, we know we're going to put on a roof edge protection. We know we're going to do this. We know we're going to do that. So you write those up already up front, and then you, for want of a better word, review it at the site and add anything else on that's there. But the JSEA is typically a more blank document that you then filling everything in on the site. So it isn't, for want of a better word, pre-filled.
Okay, so are we talking about one document with the JSA and I'm saying it now instead of JSA?
Oh no, sorry, I've taken you down the environmental side. I've got an environmental degree, so I think environment's important as much as safety.
I think attention to detail is an incredibly important thing that in this society where we've lost the ability to deep focus. I'm going to stop right now. Okay, let's go. So are we talking about like with the SWMS? There might be 3 or 4 SWMS for that project, right? With the different tasks.
Yep.
Is the JSA one document with multiple tasks, maybe day 1, day 2, day 3, or are you writing another JSA for other maybe tasks on day 3 which were different from day 1?
A JSA is a task-specific document. So you'll sit there and you go, this morning I'm going to do chainsawing.
That's within the same document.
So that's on one document, and then you'll put that JSA away, and then you'll get another JSA form, and you fill in a JSA because in the afternoon I'm going to do welding or whatever. So you have your JSAs that you do at the start of a task. So where I've worked and the way I do it is just before you start your work, you get your work party, you sit down and you just do a JSA before you actually start doing the job, so that you might have, the morning, like I said, we're doing chainsawing. So we'll just do a JSEA on the chainsawing. This afternoon, we're going to do, gutter cleaning, but that's working on a ladder. So that needs a SWMS for that one. So, that's because it's a fall from over 2 meters.
Right.
So they're separate things. So they've got to be separate tasks. You don't just have a JSA for the day and you just write everything down, because that's not quite the intent of it. It's supposed to be that risk assessment of the task just before you do it.
So they're individual records. So on a big project, you could technically have over 100 JSAs.
We had more than that on many jobs that we've done. Like, I've worked for on offshore oil platforms for staff logging, worked on shutdowns for big generators, and each work group would be doing a JSEA.
Can we not mention the O word here? We're in the renewable energy sector. No,
But I'm talking history
Yeah.
because don't forget, a lot of these learnings came from those industries. So this is where it's important to know where your history came from.
Yep.
So you turn around and you go, oil and gas back in the day was, one of the biggest employers, and they went through a whole lot of safety improvements, and things where the regulations changed because when it went wrong big. So if we look at it, you go back to Piper Alpha, and that's where the safety case came about because an oil rig blew up in England, it caught fire and that sort of stuff, and it killed 169, and I think, and correct me, I'm pretty sure I've got that number, but it was a lot of people died. So then there was an investigation by Lord Cullen who did a thing, and then they developed the safety case regime, which talks about how to deal with those sort of things. So the learnings that we've got for the renewables is standing on the works done previously. And back in the day, we didn't know, things that had impacts that they potentially do. So it's not right or wrong. It's just the learnings from all of those different industries have come across, and you go, it was dangerous. We've worked out what we need to do. So we've got those learnings coming forward, so that the renewables energy and the safety around it is an extension on all the lessons that we've learnt from doing things badly and killing lots of people. Like you go back in time and, chasing saber-toothed tigers, that was bad. No one did a JSA on that, because if you did, you'd probably look and go, oh, what's that big thing with teeth over there? That dinosaur. You get killed. So, that's the laugh. And then you go through all of the extrapolation of, humans, the industrial age, Why do you think we worked out that we needed guarding around machinery? Because in that age, there wasn't guarding around machinery, and people kept getting killed all the time. They'd get getting sucked in. So that's the thing around working through it. So there's that history and learning that we've gone through, and now renewables is at that point in time when we need renewables, as part of the solution to our environmental issues. And then you turn around and go, okay, but then we apply all those lessons that we've learned from all the mistakes that we've made previously, where we hurt people terribly. So you go, okay, well, we're putting these in place because, falling from heights over 2 meters isn't just for the solar industry. Lots of people can fall from heights,
Falling off ladders is one of the highest.
What is it? Yeah.
It's huge. I had this conversation just the other day, but I've forgotten already the actual stats. Now, with all the projects we do, we do a toolbox talk every morning.
Yep.
What's the value of these toolbox talks, and are they used to disseminate additional information? I mean, tell me, a toolbox talk, what's their role?
It's like a toolbox talk, a pre-start meeting. So you get the whole site together. This is to me, or whatever you develop it in. You might have, on large projects, you might have toolbox talks for different areas because you've got them separated up. So you'll have area A is this work group, and they never cross over into area B. So you might have a toolbox talk for area A and a toolbox talk for area B, or pre-start, whatever you want to call it. But they sit down on their toolboxes, and this is why it was done at the start of the job, and you talk about everything that's going to go on for the day. So that there's all these different tasks that are going to happen today. Fred over here is going to do the chainsawing, George over there is going to do the lawn mowing, Valley over there is going to do the solar installation, Aaron over here is going to bring the crane in to move the inverters, So then it gives you that advantage to know all the different things that are happening on the site, so that you're not then just working in isolation. You can go, oh, hang on, there's going to be cranes moving around on site. So there's an additional thing where we might have plant moving around. So those other things tell you about other potential hazards and risks that may have an impact on your task. So rather than just looking at my little thing and going, oh, I'm working on this today, I'm going to be doing the electrical work, installing the solar panels. Oh, but the guys mowing the lawns are going to be coming down. Okay, well, we just got to remember that the lawnmower guys are going to be here. So, that's not part of my job task, is it? But they might influence my operations. So it's something that we call SIMOPS, simultaneous operations. 2 different operations happening on the same place at the same time. Do they talk to each other, and do they interfere with each other and create a hazard that wasn't there normally unless the other one's there? So the toolbox talks are there to convey that information and all the other information that you need to do about the site. So, first time on the site, you're talking to everybody about, emergency weather, this, who's in charge, who's on the site, who's the first aider today, all those different things that you need to communicate about what's happening for the whole day too. So that's what those are for.
So it's really the opposite of compartmentalisation, which a lot of businesses nowadays are heading towards, where one part doesn't know what the left doesn't know what's the right. But this is the total opposite, because you've got this big project and people really need to know what other people are doing immediately near them and even on other parts of the site. Is that
That's
fair
what
to
it
say?
is, and that's because if you look throughout history, a lot of big incidents have happened because two people have been doing separate things, and one's interfered with the other, and they've caused an incident because the other one person didn't know that the other person was doing X, Y, or Z, and then it goes wrong. Think about lockout, tag out. Why do you need to lock out, tag out stuff?
Safety.
I'm going to go. Think about what the reason is. I'm going to go and change the light bulb. If I don't lock and tag it out, someone else might come in and go, I need to turn the power back on because I need my computer on. All of a sudden, bang, I get zapped. Yep. That's what that simultaneous operation thing is, and that's what the Toolbox talks try and communicate the information and then let you know, so that's why I've got to make sure that no one turns the switch off because Aaron's going to be working on the lights. We put all the lockout, tag out and all the other good things in place that we know prevent that, but it's also then communicating that that's what's happening rather than someone coming and going, why is the power off? And not understanding. Same as that sort of stuff.
Now, I do want to talk about contractors and just remind me if I forget, and our liabilities as an installer if we're employing them. Now, what's an overall risk assessment? What in regards to the project? How does that? Is there a specific term for an overall risk assessment for the project?
Yeah, you'll have a project risk assessment. So, funnily enough,
all right.
No, but
that's good.
But you'll start off with a project risk assessment. So you'll go through at a higher level and identify all the risks that go with doing the job. So you'll go install solar panels. There's going to be a whole lot of risks associated with installation. So you'll know that. So you'll look at those and just identify those risks, and then you have processes to detail those as you go down. So then you'll have a risk assessment for different bits and pieces of the work. You'll have risk assessments around, specific activities. Like big jobs. You'll do that, and then you'll have the task specific risk assessment.
Is that a legal requirement?
Yeah, because you have to control the hazards and the risks on the site. So the only way you can do that's with a risk assessment. So you've got to have risk assessments in place. Whether you call it a project risk assessment or whatever, you can do it another way.
Okay, so that could be covered by the JSA.
Well, the JSA is part of the risk assessment that you do.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so that's what I mean. So you go up and down. It's got to be fit for purpose and scale.
Look, this is the thing, Aaron. Like I've been in this industry for a long time, learning every day, and I'm still a little bit confused about some of these things. So I can imagine that a lot of our audience will be going, I've never really understood what is the process and what is the sequence. Now, I mentioned, and I haven't forgot, contractors.
Yep.
You're employing some contractors to do, say, trenching or what other works that your in-house team are not doing.
Yep.
They have SWMS. They have JSAs, hopefully. They've done a risk assessment.
Yep.
Where's the liability of, say, Greenwood, who's employing this contractor, like Jono's trenching? Where does their liability start and end when it comes to their documents?
As in, the contractor has to have the contractor has a SWMS in place because you need a SWMS in place to do those tasks.
Yes.
So the contractor has developed those SWMS.
Yes.
And the JS, and they've done all the documentation around their activity. So we haven't done it, but as being the person undertaking or in control of the site for one of the they call it PC, person undertaking business, is one of the ones that there's a whole lot of legal terms around this, but it's basically like who's in charge of the site. So we have a responsibility to make sure that those documents are in place and that they're fit for purpose.
That's what I was going to say.
So, but fit for purpose is a bit of a problem because we're hiring them because we're not the experts.
Right.
So
we're not really qualified.
So we're not really qualified to look at all of the hazards and the risks. But what we do is we've hired them in good faith. We've tested them that they're the experts. They do a SWMS. We look at it. If we're in that work area, we sign on to the SWMS if we're doing anything else, because that SWMS is the document that's controlling those hazards in that workplace. So everybody in that workplace has to sign onto the SWMS that's controlling that operation. Now, this is where it gets confusing because you might have different companies all with different swims, and then which one's in play? Well, that's the decision that has to be made as to which one is the one that's being followed for that particular task. So that's why Greenwood might have an excavation swims, but we're not using that at the site because we've got Jono's excavation doing it. So they want to use their swims is the one in play. So that's the one that you then have to, check that it meets all the legal requirements. And that's not an expert thing. There's a list of legal things that, the legislation says you have to have in a swim. So you make sure they're all there, look at it, make sure that you've been part of the consultation for, at the site for it to go into, and then sign on it. And that's how it works. So, that's the different part. But we have a responsibility to make sure that the swims has all the components that the law requires. But not the expertise stuff is something that's beyond us. So that's, like I said, remember, it's the best of your ability.
Yes.
So the best of our ability is we're hiring them because we're not excavator drivers and all that sort of stuff. We don't do that. But we look through it and make sure that it complies with the legal requirements, that it has all the different parts in a swims that the law says that it has to do.
Because ultimately, we're accountable.
We're in charge of the site. So yes, we have a responsibility to them to make sure that the workplace is safe. And that then means that the responsibility is checking that they are complying with that law, which has a swims in place that's legal.
It's almost like that racy project management thing, responsible, accountable, consulted and informed.
That's right.
Comes into play with this whole process of swims, JSEAs, even standard operating procedures. Toolbox talks a whole lot. It's a really interesting area, and obviously, for an installer who's starting off in a domestic situation, what advice would you have in general for, let's say they're not dealing with any external contractors, they're a 2 or 3 man team, what would be the best approach for them from a SWMS and a JSEA perspective? I know it's a broad question.
No, I was going to say, it's not actually that broad a question because so many people have that coming to them all the time, because everyone goes out, starts their own business, like you move out, you've worked as an apprentice for somebody else, then you go out and start your own business. Most people try and steal the swims and the documents that they've had from their previous employer, which is what everyone basically does. It's called R&D, rip off and duplicate.
Oh, I like that.
But you've got to understand that all of the regulatory agencies are there to try and help to start off with. And this is something, speaking as an ex-regulator, we've actually got the same aim as everybody out in the industry. And everyone sort of looks and goes, what do you mean? You go, I don't want anyone to get hurt. As a regulator, I'm here to try and stop people getting hurt. You as an industry, your obligation is to try and stop people getting hurt. So we're actually trying to do the same thing. So most regulators have on their website guidance for swims and everything else. So if you look in Victoria, there's documentation on what a swims requires, and there's a template for a swims. New South Wales has the same. Safe work. They've all got documentation around that thing to help them do that sort of stuff. And that, so as a person starting your own business or a small one, moving into those spaces, go and look at the regulators. A lot of them will also have people you can ask to help. You can talk to them. If you go and talk to a regulator up front before you've had an accident or before they're trying to fine you, they are more than happy to help you, because if they help you, then that's one less person they've got to go and beat up to try and get to comply, because they'll set good behaviours up front. Like I said, do your front end work, set your good behaviours up front, makes a whole lot less work afterwards. The regulators think the same. If I can help people with their compliance up front and education up front, then there's less effort that I've got to do in the aftermath. They don't like me as a regulator. I hated having to enforce on people and tell them to do stuff, because 90% of the people doing it were trying to do the right thing. And, you're sitting there going, I know you're trying to do the right thing. I'm here to help you go ahead. So, you do that. It's the recalcitrants who keep doing the same thing time and time again that then you then just say, look, I've lost patience. But that's so starting off, go and have a look at the resources available from the regulator. And they're not that hard. They're actually simplistic, and they explain it and they'll go back. It might be, you mightn't understand it. If you read the documentation straight away, ring up an inspector and ask, or ring up regulator, and they'll have someone you can talk to.
That's really good advice.
Regulators are here to help first and foremost.
Yeah, we'll try to put a link to the correct website URLs.
I've even got copies of them.
Yeah, in regards to what Aaron is talking about.
Yep.
Now, I've seen some pretty complicated swims. I've actually created some pretty complicated swims, much to the chagrin or chagrin, or however you pronounce that word, of others. I went too far, and as I said, I've seen some that are just ridiculous. what is the ideal swim? Like, apart from obviously, being the correct message,
Yep.
and we want everyone to go home with all their limbs intact.
Yep.
What kind of format are we talking about? How simple do they? Yeah, it's.
Yeah, and I was going to say,
I'm not asking this question very well. Sorry.
no, but I know the question you're asking because I had the same question when I was kicking off, starting off and having your right swims and that. You're sort of going, what's it got to be? And one of the biggest things that mistakes that people make is making them overcomplicated. And because, if you go out to a site and you're trying to do a job and there's a 70-page swims, how's that going to help everybody on the site? It might need to be a 70-page swims, but then you're talking about whether it's fit for purpose or not. So it's got to be fit for purpose.
Right.
Do not make it overly complicated. That's one of the biggest failings that I see in swims all the time. Everyone makes it way, way, way too complicated. Go back, simple is better, like realistically, because what you want to do is identify the task, identify the hazards associated with the tasks, which then falls out to the risks, identify the controls for those risks, and then turn around and talk about, how you're going to implement them, how you're going to make sure that that they're implemented and who's responsible for the implementation. That's basically the requirement of a swim. So don't make it too complicated. Don't write, like lots and lots of stuff like I know I did when I first did them. You're thinking, more details are better, more details are better, more details are better. It's not, that's not what it's required. It's the right amount of detail for the task. Like working on a ladder, cleaning gutters needs a swims, corporate thing. That shouldn't be a 70-page swims.
No, definitely not. Yeah.
But working on, working on a, like for us, doing solar installations over water. Now that has, electricity and water and all that sort of stuff.
What a mix.
But that's got to be slightly more detailed than working on a ladder or swims. But don't make it too complicated because then nobody will read it. Nobody will listen to it. It'll just become an exercise that doesn't help the safety on the site. And that's the kicker. So that's the biggest thing is simplify. Go back and look at what the regulator talks about and say, okay, what do I have to do? I have to identify the task steps and make sure that I'm dealing with activities that have those high risk construction, hazards and risks associated with it, the works hazards and risks associated with them, and tick those off and then work out where they are and then work out the controls for them. That's what you've got to go back and do, but don't turn around and write it out for like a detailed work instruction where it's turn bolt 3 turns this way and then next step, pick up Loctite, blah, blah, blah. That's not what a swims is supposed to be.
That's more of an SOP though,
That's what I mean. And that's where you have SOPs, but a lot of people start to blur the line between SOPs and swims and everything else and think that they can try and cram it all into one and then it makes a document that nobody can use.
Apart from a paperweight. Okay, so talking about paper and weight and the fact that we live in this fairly digital age, what are your views on a paper swims, hard copy, as opposed to digital? Please discuss.
I have multiple views on this, and we'll talk about it. I have a personal view.
That's what I want to hear first.
Yeah, the personal view is, it's going to sound crazy, but I like paper swims. And everyone goes, why? And I said, because when you're sitting out on site, you've got a paper document, easy to refer to, because it's back on, it'll be back in your folder at your job site, with all the permits and everything else. Easy to go back and have a look at, easy to deal with, easy to talk to with the guys. Like you can hold a piece of paper and you can show them and point it out and everyone can see it. Typically when we're talking about electronic swims, everyone's using a mobile phone. Screens are smaller, it's harder to see, all that sort of stuff. It's more about how the human works. It's the human machine interface. It's just something else that I sort of like working on as part of health and safety because a lot of the time it's the how you interface with the other things that you need to do your job that then can cause hazards. So you think about it, you've got a little tiny swims on your phone. You've got to talk to all the other people, talk about it. Is it good for a prompt? Yeah, but can somebody come back easily and have a look at it? It makes it harder, because they've got to log into whatever system you've got and all those sort of things. It's not impossible, but it's harder. Have I had a case where we've been out on site and the network went down and WorkSafe turned up? Yes.
Well, that's a really good point.
We had that where WorkSafe turned up on a site and we were down on network. We could not access our swims from the start of the day. So you're relying upon a whole lot of other stuff. So, there's pluses and minuses to both, because an electronic swims has a lot of pluses to it as well. Easy to change. Like most guys will have paper copies of their swims in their cars. What happens if you make an update? Does it go to everybody else in the organisation? You've got to remember to send them out, and they'll keep their old copy and that sort of stuff. So there's a disadvantage to paper swims. There's that sort of side, where the electronic swims has the advantage that it's updated easily.
But don't you think that, like, with the digital swims, you're more likely to tick and flick? And if I physically are touching something, the neural pathways I'm creating aren't as deep as the understanding you get when I pick up a pen and I do a flick here and I've read through that. Because there's been a lot of studies to say that you'll actually learn at a deeper level. And we're talking about... So I know, look...
No, I agree.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I'm an old school person. I've got a fountain pen. You know me, I write copious notes on paper, because that's how it actually goes and stores in my brain. So that's one of the reasons why I do like paper swims, because... And especially I like people having to write stuff down on site. And then I used to hand it around so that everybody'd have a turn at writing stuff down. So that then, I've got to write this, I've got to write this. And then they're signing. It's not just click and flick, I've drawn this on the thing. It's actually oh my gosh, I'm legally signing onto this document. There's a lot of power behind that for the person.
Yep.
And that's why I like paper swims, for those reasons. It's not to say it's better or worse. It just they both have different advantages and different disadvantages. So it depends upon what's fit for your system. Like, do you want to have electronic swims? Don't get me wrong, electronic swims are awesome from a compliance point of view, because you can audit them easily. You know they've been done. You can check that they've been done on the site. Like, it's that, they've done the swims. We can have a look at what the hazards and risks are easily from remote access into the databases. So like I said, there's a plus and a minus to both, and you've got to then work out what works best for your organisation and what your organisation needs.
But if you're being audited, for instance, Greenwood we follow things above the ladder, and we're also ISO accredited, which comes with a whole a higher level of scrutiny and responsibility. If you're doing, and I love the idea of paper swims on site. There definitely should be something on site for this project. What are the requirements from a WorkSafe perspective, and let's say ISO, why not talk ISO, of actually getting that into an electronic form or an evidence-based form? What is there anything that...
You've got to have the records. So like, if there's an incident, then there's a time frame that you've actually got to keep those swims in place for, under the occupational health and safety laws around Australia. Various time frames, but you can't just ditch it straight away.
Right.
Once the job's done, technically you don't need the swims anymore if the job's been completed and everything else. So, like, there's that sort of point of view from just a job point of view. But from an ISO point of view, you then need evidence to show that you've done this sort of stuff. So then there's a whole lot of different things of storing it. So like, once you've done the paper swims, you put it all into a folder and then you archive it. So, you might have your job pack for all the guys out in the field. Got all your swims, got all your meetings, got all your inspections, all of that different bits and pieces to prove that you've complied with all of your obligations to manage a job safely on a site, plus all the quality, plus everything else. Put it in a job pack and then you go away and archive it for X number of years until, like in case something goes, you need to have evidence for either ISO, for your certification to prove that you've done it, or your client might come back and say, I want to see that you've done X, Y, or Z. Because they've charged them for it. So there's a lot of different things that you've got to understand under the laws as to what it is. But from a swims point of view, you only need it for whilst the job is going on unless there's an incident. And then after that, then you've got to keep it for X amount of time. And that I think it's 2 years under the Victorian Act, but I'd have to go and check that. That's like something, I know there's a little thing that if there's an incident, you then put it all away in a different folder and just keep it for longer.
Okay, on that sobering note, I think we should really talk about something that's like, it's pretty full on, for want of a better expression, and that is the legal requirements, implications, and dare I say ramifications of this whole area. Yeah, could you, for instance, the mandatory requirements in Australia from a federal perspective, and also could you look at maybe state-specific variations of Victoria, New South Wales, Queensland? Yeah.
All of the states have their own occupational health and safety acts, because this is how the wonderful government system in Australia works. Like,
stop it.
No, I'm just saying it just cascades down. You got the federal, you got the states, and then you got the local councils. Occupational health and safety is at the state level, like as in New South Wales has Safe Work. Victoria has WorkSafe, and then all the different states have their own different OH&S regulators, because all of those acts are there. There's been a process around harmonisation for the OH&S Act. So the majority of states have signed on to the harmonisation requirements under occupational health and safety. Victoria hasn't.
Interesting.
But that's not to say that it isn't complying with all the requirements. It just hasn't signed it. There's something political behind that, and that's another conversation for another podcast. We go, oh dear.
Definitely.
So there's that, but the requirements. So basically, the requirements are all very similar around the different states. Like I said, there's 19 in Victoria, 18 in New South Wales, and that. But if you look at it, New South Wales' 18 has one with two parts to it, whereas in Victoria they're separated to the two different things.
Okay.
So that's all it is. There's just subtle little differences, but the intent is still the same. So now when you're going through the different laws, you then start to get into the different spaces where it's legislatively being pushed, because what they're trying to do is get people who are taking shortcuts deliberately and constantly doing it, knowingly putting people at risk. They want to change that behaviour, and that's what regulation is intended for.
So is that federal? Does it become federal then?
No, that's
not?
state. So you will get prosecuted if you have an incident that the regulator investigates and determines that an organisation and or individual hasn't met their requirements. They will prosecute you in the state that it's occurred. So if you hurt someone, so like Greenwood, we work in different states.
Yep.
If something goes wrong on a New South Wales site, New South Wales regulator will come in, and if there's a something to be questioned, it will be under the New South Wales Act. If it's in Victoria, it will be under the Victorian Act. So you've got the different regulatory regimes, but each of them are all very similar in what they chase after you because of that national harmonisation. Victoria has introduced industrial manslaughter, so that if someone dies on a site, it is industrial manslaughter.
Other states
have got that as well.
Yeah,
but Victoria was like one of the more recent ones, and it's the more knowledgeable ones of coming through. So they introduced industrial manslaughter, where it came through, and it was and it's personal. The CEO or whoever's at fault, that they will determine, they will start throwing those sort of charges around, which is jail time. So not only will the company get fined a large amount of money, but it will also be jail time.
All right, can I give you a little scenario? Again, we'll go to a smaller installer.
Yep.
He's done a few domestic systems, right? Done some battery storage, and he's got his first commercial system over 30 kVA. So it's 100. Let's say it's a 100 kilowatt system, commercial roof, 11 meters. He supplied PPE to the workers. The harnesses are out of date.
Yep.
He knows this.
Yep.
They've been subjected to chemical damage, etc. And something happens and it fails, and someone gets injured, critically injured, not death, but let's say paralysed. I know this is pretty horrible stuff, but what's going to happen to that business owner?
Well, number one, WorkSafe will go completely through all of his records, and that will take a serious amount of time. So he will be getting lots of requests, and I use that in inverted commas because they're not a request you can refuse. It's it's a notice to produce, and if you don't do it, there's a fine, and that's a breaking of the law, because they will turn around and say you have to produce this stuff by this date, and you can go back and talk to them about the dates or something, but it's not I'm going to ignore it. So they will go through that. That will take the time that they do. Then they will go through and determine what parts of the OH&S Act he didn't follow. So in that case, he's provided knowingly.
Yes,
so that then goes from, for want of a better word, a mistake to negligence. So then you work, and this is down into the criminal sort of law thing. So it's negligence. He's deliberately done something wrong.
Yeah.
Not. I've tried my best and it didn't work, and so this is you've done something that is wrong. That will not be a pleasant set of charges from the public prosecutors. So WorkSafe will put together a brief. The prosecutor will come in, and that person will be personally charged with, I can't remember which parts of the act that he's breaking for that one, but it's not going to be good.
Are we talking prison time and fine, or
it depends? It depends on what the severity was, because most of them, have that space. Typically, it's fines, but large fines. But negligence is starting to walk into, other places. So it's not something you want to do. Put it that way. Just don't do it.
And if it was unknowing, but I'll preface this with saying, well, there was no checks and balances to actually see that you've gone over that date.
It won't be negligence. As in, like, it won't be that deliberately you knew that would go wrong and you've done it knowingly that it was non-compliant.
Yeah.
This is your process has failed, so you don't have a good process in place. You will still be...
Or you don't have a process in
you know
place.
what I mean.
Yeah.
The process is not there or you failed. So it will still be bad, but doing something deliberately, it's, like the definition between murder and manslaughter. Think of it that way. Murder is the worst because you've knowingly and deliberately gone and killed someone. Manslaughter is you didn't mean to do it, but it happened. So they're different levels of bad.
It makes sense. I mean, I suppose the question is following on from that is that there's minimum standards with harnesses and an employer purchases a harness, maybe it's a $400 harness, and we know that those standard harnesses, if you're in suspension trauma, you're lucky to get 15 minutes. It becomes, I suppose, an economic question whether the employer goes, I really care about the guys. Let's buy the $1,000 harnesses that have a little seat that comes out and they can hang around for more than 15 minutes. And yes, we've got our things in place because,
And that's where it comes down to the risk assessments because you can turn around and go, I can't afford the $1,000 for the harnesses. So that's a risk. So what are you going to do about addressing the risk for the person being suspended for more than 15 minutes?
We'll have a strategy.
If you have a strategy and all the tools in place to get them down before the 15 minutes occurs, then you don't need those things, because you're saying that's a risk that we know exists. How are we going to deal with it? And like most things in safety, there's typically no one solution. You can come up with a whole number of different solutions that'll solve the problem.
Now, is there anything specifically that is with large-scale renewable energy projects that's a little bit different from standard construction, from a SWMS perspective and a danger perspective that you've come across?
Not really, because the risks and the hazards are all generally the same around large construction. You've got moving plant. You've got trucks moving around, you've got equipment, you've got sharp edges, you've got electrical work, you've got all the different bits and pieces. You've got the sim ops where you've got different people doing different things on a site. A lot of it is the standard hazards that go around construction work, falling from heights, falling in a trench, like for us working over water, like we don't work in tunnels, but that's all right, not everybody does. But, like excavations, there's all those different things. And so there's a lot of really good and well thought out practices and processes to manage those issues. Like if you're going in large scale renewables, wind turbines is a little different, because that's fairly high up and, they're restricted access. So, you're turning around and going, okay, you've got to run different things for those. But that's not unusual. Working on a roof's not new. Lots of people have worked on roofs, like people putting up, doing the roofing.
What about the electrical side of things?
The electrical side of things, it's a little different in as much as, solar panels generate power when they're sitting out in the sun. So, you just got to be cognizant of the fact that they're generating when you're putting them out on the thing so that they're basically live. So you just got to manage that thing. But that's not that frightening for most of the Sparkies. Like all the guys that we've got in Greenwood, they understand it, they know it. They've worked out ways of making sure that they don't load it up until they're ready until it's all safe to connect everything together. So each panel's basically in isolation. Working on the sites, working out in the country, snakes, cattle, all that sort of stuff. There's nothing really that different from everything else that we do.
I think there's one thing though, and I just want to get your views on this, and that's like moving panels, right? Now, I'm not talking about getting the panels onto the roof. There's various ways, EWP, there's crane lifts with a glazier cage, there's even solar panel lifters if you're doing small domestic stuff. But the physicality of moving these heavy panels around on roofs are at least 5 degrees pitch. What is that classed as a high risk?
No, it is. But that again is not that much different to a lot of the stuff that I've dealt with. Like moving large, heavy objects around on sites because you're up in places where you can't get mechanical lifters and that sort of stuff into places, or into certain areas where you just don't have access to that. So you just got those sort of things working around. Again, not great because it puts loads on people. And, we've been looking at stuff with WorkSafe. They've just done a project into looking into musculoskeletal diseases. So they've got a new project that I just went through, and, shout out to those guys. They've a project being run by La Trobe University with a new tool on determining controls for
Wow.
manual handling type stuff, so they're looking at that sort of jazz, which is really, really cool because it's great looking at new ways of stopping it. Because what's the normal thing that we do? Someone gets hurt, oh, you need more training, or you need stretching, or you need this and you need that, but we keep having people getting sore, so they're looking at other underlying causes, and it's really important. But again, I don't see solar as different to a lot of the other jobs that I've done. Like, I'm lucky I'm not small, so I'm fairly good at carrying big, heavy things around, and lots of people use me for it.
Yeah.
But that was always part of my jobs that I've done, because you're just carrying equipment in awkward places and going into places, doing environmental sampling. You've got to carry big loads of equipment and carrying water out that weighs a lot and all this sort of stuff, samples out. So it's, to me, it's not unusual. It's not a great thing because people do keep getting hurt with these musculoskeletal diseases. So we've got to look at other ways of improving that.
Yep.
Whether it's, the people or whether it's other things that we can deal with, like we don't know, but we've just got to keep looking at it because that's one of the risks that we've just got to keep focusing upon.
Now, what about reporting of injuries? Now, like the typical domestic installer, he scrapes his finger, gets a little bit of a cut, he wraps some bloody
electrical tape around it, like we always do.
Whatever. And what are the rules in regards to reporting of accidents and minor injuries, and what is best practice in that regard?
From mine, and it's always what I've wanted to do, is best practice is tell us about everything. And everyone goes, why? And I'm going, because everything's a lesson. Everything has an opportunity to learn. And you sort of go, what? And you go, something that you might think means nothing, when you put it together with all the other data, it actually starts to indicate trends and other things that we can deal with. So, like getting all the information that we can, which includes being told about, things that nearly happened, like everyone uses the term near miss, and it's sort of going, okay, so there's that. Minor incidents, major incidents, close show, whatever you want to call.
But how do you educate the workers who, in a lot of cases, strangely enough, when I started Renewables, 40% of my class in the early 2000s was women, and for some reason that's dropped off. So most of the people on site are men, excuse my lack of political correctness here, and they are, in a lot of cases, reluctant to say, oh yeah, I did split my finger, or I did, puncture my thumb, what have you. How do you actually educate them to say, look, we really need to know that data. It's okay. Tell us.
There's a couple of ways to do it. Number one is make it easy to tell us. Because the first thing you do, if you give them a 10-page form that they've got to fill out, I'll tell you what, you're not going to hear anything about it.
70-page swim.
Yeah, that's right. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You've got to make it so that it's accessible for them to do. So it's not a drain on their, oh gosh, The second one is no blame. And that's really important, because previously there was a culture of you've done it, it's your fault, blah, 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 you were stupid, whatever. And it's all that horrible history of, blaming the person and all this sort of stuff. And, now I've got all this paperwork I've got to do, and can't you just, tape yourself up and not tell me? And understandably, where it used to be, that was okay. But now it's not, because the data is king for us. We need to understand what's going on. So first of all, make it easy to report. Second of all, never blame them. There is and then third is involve them in why you're doing it, so that they understand the reasonings behind why I want all that data. So why would I want all that data? Well, one organisation I was at, there were 3 incidents that appeared completely separate. We're talking about, money not going into an account, paying something, someone getting hurt and something else. And then when you go through it and you do an analysis and you get this thing called the root cause, you found that the cause of that incident happening was the same for all 3. And then you go, well, if I fix this, then we're not going to have any of these things. So that's sort of that. Now, and I know this is going to be hard because there's the camera, but I don't have a little thing I can put up. when you came to the Toolbox talk I gave for the Greenwood guys, I showed something called the safety triangle.
Yes, yes.
And there's a thing down the bottom where there's actually a relationship between the number of minor incidents you have and the number of major incidents you have.
Sorry, Aaron, I laughed because I thought you were going to talk about the rabbit with a pancake on his head. But
No. I thought we'd leave that one alone because that was a visual gag. And
Yes, and it was a good one.
This is for radio.
Yes. Yeah.
So, but there's a relationship. So the more of those lower ones that we see, the more the signs are coming up that, you know, there's stuff happening. So you start to reduce the number of those smaller incidents. So you have a large number of near misses, but if you reduce the number of those minor incidents, then the chance of them progressing up is statistically reduced. So that's where we want to get that data, because we can then tell where we are on that trajectory.
So without that data,
we can't do anything.
We can't really, yeah.
You can't do anything without data and being able to analyse it and look at where the trends are and going, well, everyone's cutting their hands. Oh, wow. Well, have we got the wrong stuff? Or we got them doing the wrong thing? Are they trying to carry, you know, panels without gloves? You know, you don't know where you need to put your effort in to make a difference.
I'll give you, you're dead right. I'll give you a good example. At a previous job, there was a lot of people cutting a tray with safety glasses, really cheap ones, that are open, and then someone copped something in their eye because it bounced off their forehead and into their eye. So they went, oh, we'll go and get some goggles. Well, these goggles had also some ventilation holes, and it happened again. So in the end, they got these really decent U-Butte, expensive goggles that really eliminated any issues with particulate matter, in other words, galvanized zinc, whatever, come into your eye.
Yeah.
And because at the end of the day, that's horrible getting a piece of metal in your eye. It's certainly not as bad as death, but it's still pretty horrible.
It's pretty grim. Like, you know, death is just an end, but, you know, someone who loses an eye or something like that's you can't discount that as being, you know, good or bad. But I agree, like the number of times that you found out when something bad happens and you have to start reporting it, and then you find out from, oh, this has happened 10 times before, but no one told us, you know, and you're going, oh, if we'd known about those 10 times, we could have done something to stop the bad one happening. That's why you got to get data. You know, it's just that thing, it's that prevention. So you start to talk to the guys about it, involve them, you know, share stuff, get them, and then they start to see the benefits of telling you.
Yeah.
And it's not an increase in workload. Don't make it.
Well, this is the thing. It can't be seen as an increase in workload.
Yep.
So I'm a great believer in these tasks being done within the work hours of the day. Because
Absolutely.
if they're not, they become a burden. And quite frankly, as we mentioned before, time's our most precious resource.
That's
and
right.
who we choose to spend with it and what we do with it is really bloody important. Now, have you got in your mind, or can you maybe step us through a step-by-step process for creating a SWMS JSA? Or is that... Yeah.
No, we can do that. That's the way that I'll just talk about how we did it. So, so you're sitting down, and we'll do a SWMS. So you're sitting down there, and the first thing you do is, you know, you're talking about what the task is that you're going to do. So you work out whether you're going to get up on a roof or something like that. And then, you know, you go, okay, has it got the one of the 19 in Victoria or 18 somewhere else in Australia, I should say Victoria and Canberra, or 18 in Australia, has it got one of those high risk work, you know, things and construction activities? So you go, yep, it has. Okay, so then it needs a SWMS. So that's all right. So you go get the SWMS document out. So you make sure you're doing it on the right piece of paper.
Yes.
You know, so that's always the thing. So you get the form out, you get the group together of the people who are going to do it. So you get the subject matter experts. Don't leave Aaron do it. That's bad, because you'll get a SWMS with a pancake rabbit.
But
so
you'll still contribute though.
No, I'm going to be part of it. So it's not that I'm not going to do it. It's not that I'm not going to do it by myself.
Yes.
Because that's the difference. You've got to have knowledgeable experts feeding into the SWMS. Otherwise, I'm not going to know all the hazards and the risks associated with the task.
Absolutely.
So you go through that. You talk about the task. You lay out the steps, which is what the SWMS has to do. That's all right. I thought.
Yes, we've had some technical difficulties, which we'll probably edit out or not.
we might leave them in because they're fun.
We'll leave them in.
So you then do that. You go through. You identify the hazards. That then gives you the risks. Then you identify the controls. Then you go through with the controls. You work out what they are. You work out how they're going to be implemented. You know, the effectiveness of the implementation, and then who's going to be responsible for implementing them. There's also the other parts of the SWMS that are required, which is you've got to identify the laws and the training around the people that need to go in there. So there's those certain things that need to go in there as well.
And that be your job.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
where it comes in. That's where it's simple. That's where I feed in the stuff and go, okay, what are the laws in there? And then you've just got to make sure that you have all the different parts signed by the right part. So you've got to fill it in. So you get the template out from WorkSafe, you put in all the parts, you've got who put it together, who developed it, who authorised the swims. So, once it's been developed, and then it goes through, and then that's how you then develop the swims that then can go out on the sites with the guys. And then that leaves the space where they can fill it all in. They can make changes for anything that they find different at the site, and then it's so the work party can sign onto it. So that's basically the short answer. So it takes, it usually takes an hour or so to do a swims with a work group to do it properly.
Okay.
So that's all. So it's not long. For the average swims, they can be more complicated, or they can be less. But it's about an hour to develop a good generic hour or two to develop a good generic swims.
Okay, for a small business who probably can't afford your services, who is the best person to actually take on a little bit of this? And I'm not, because it is a big job.
Yep.
What are they at a bare minimum? What do they need to know? Do they need to know all the nitty gritty of the legal requirements? I mean, it seems that they do.
Well, the legal requirements, it's about identifying the training. So you've got to identify which laws apply,
Yes.
and that's not too hard because
Right.
Most of the guys will know what laws apply because they're working in those spaces. It'll be the Occupational Health and Safety Act, whichever state you're in, or WorkSafe Health and Safety Act. There might be some standards that they'll need to comply with anyway because they'll need to know about those because they'll have been taught them as part of their training. So most of the guys doing the work will have been taught a lot of this stuff, as part of your license for running excavators. You're taught the laws that you have to comply with because that's what you're licensed to do. So they're the laws that come in. There might be some other laws if you're doing something quirky, but you'll typically get help with the organisation that you're doing it with will help you with that if you're talking to those guys. So like if you're working on a hospital site and there's a radiation, because that requires a swim to working with radiation.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So there's a radiation around a hospital. So like electricians going into the X-ray rooms, there's radiation there. They'll be then helped with the people on those sites for those difficult ones. But for the normal ones, it's just what you've been trained to do. So that's where it goes through that way. So they can, and most of the swims are designed so that the person who's a subject matter expert can write a swims. That's what the requirements are. They're not designed so that you've got to go and pay, some huge consultant a fortune to go through and knock a swims up. That's not what a swim's designed to be. It's designed by the regulations so that the person doing the job can fill the swims in with the knowledge they've got.
It's funny, like we're moving to a lot of groundwork with the solar farms, and intuitively but incorrectly, I always thought that roof work would be worse. But then when you start looking at what goes on on ground mount systems, you're talking about open trenches, you're talking about all this kind of machinery. In your experience or statistically, is this where most of the accidents happen on the ground compared to the roof? Or
I was going to say, you've got to look at it from a whole lot of different reasons. And one, there's a lot more work done on the ground than on roofs. So if you just go on raw incidents, you go, well, there's more happening on the ground than the roof, because you've just got more work sites on the ground. But then on the ground, there can be a whole lot more other risks that people don't think about. So this is where you get caught out, because on a roof, typically, a roof's easier because it's controlled by you guys. So you're the only guys up there doing work, so that the roof's there, there's this. You should know where the skylights are and be protecting those. So, you've got all the covers over there so you can't fall through a skylight. You've put edge protection up, or you've got your harnesses on. So you're controlling the majority of the risks that you've identified. On the ground, it's sort of funny because people are on the ground, so that's one less. They sort of switch into a different mode. I'm always on the ground. It's always safe, So you'll be running around and doing stuff, but then the guys will be digging trenches over here, and you could have more people working on the work site. So by making the work site more complicated, introduces more risks, which then means with more risks and hazards, the chance of something going wrong goes up. Just from a sheer, throwing darts at a board, you get more darts getting thrown at the board. So that's where you do it. But are they any more dangerous than each other? Like working on a roof typically makes you feel like it is, because you can fall and die. Like anything, the big falls are a problem. But there's so many other ways of getting caught on the ground. I just think each work site is unique. Each work site has its own personality. Trying to with all the hazards and risks. So there's think it's more about the people doing the job and potentially complacency.
I was going to say that because to me, like when you're working on a roof, personally, when I was on a roof when I was younger, there's always a little bit of tension in your body because you're up high, you're on a roof, whether it's 5 degrees or 45, and I've been on 45-degree roofs, and then if you're transitioning away from that kind of work and you're going to ground, there might be a little bit of complacency because you're on terra firma. You know the earth, so maybe you become a little bit more lax. But you've got all this machinery. You got tripping hazards, especially a solar farm. There's stuff everywhere, and I just think you just got to be aware of your environment, don't you?
And it's just how you think, like. Let's put the old classic down. Up on a roof, would you walk around on your phone doing stuff?
No.
Do you walk around on the ground on your phone?
A lot of people do. I won't say I do.
No, but I'm just saying there's the instant difference.
That's right.
You perceive the roof to be more dangerous, so you wouldn't walk around on the roof on your phone, but you're quite happy to walk around the ground with a phone. So all of a sudden, it's this.
Yet the roof is a more controlled environment,
That's what I mean, That's what I mean. And so many people have been injured talking on a phone on a work site. It's frightening. That's just the scariest one. And people walking across roads on their phone getting hit by cars. You just sort of go, it's that thing of complacency and complacency with hazards and risks that humans are brilliant at doing, which then puts ourselves in danger.
Oh, gosh, it really is. There's a lot of food for thought. This has been a really good podcast. I've learnt heaps. Now, I think we'll wrap it up. What are some final thoughts from yourself? Basically, some key insights from your experience, and also how companies can actually improve their existing SWMS and JSA procedures. And
I was going to say. I was going to come back. I was sitting back. I was having it was more. I was sitting back and listening to the thinking music. Yeah. So I had the thinking music running in my head, going, "You've just thrown a whole lot of questions at me that are huge," and I'm going,
"I know you can cope with them."
No, I know, but I'm sitting there going, "Okay, so companies and SWMS. I'll go to that one first. Yep. I think it's." Make sure that you don't make any of the fundamental errors with your SWMS. Go back and review them and make sure that you've identified all the hazards. Make sure that you've involved the work parties in actually the subject matter experts in developing the SWMS so that you've got the right people doing the right work. Don't make them complicated. Do not make them complicated. That will just turn everybody off. And then it just becomes whatever type moment. And that's not what it's got to be. It's got to be helping the people realise what's going on. All the other standard ones, making sure they're authorised, making sure you've got the right sign on, making sure that you're talking to all the workplaces. That's the thing. But go back to the first principles of a SWMS and understand what it is and understand what you've got to do and what you want out of it from you guys. Work out how you do all your procedures. Don't overload your field guys with paperwork. That's the other thing. You're making the guys do all the paperwork and then you're going, but you're not getting your job done. There's those things of balancing time and resources and everything else.
Totally agree. I mean, there's a whole issue with rapid switching that you and I have talked about previously. Lots of times. And the ability to go back to the task you were doing before, there's a residual residual effect which actually has been proven to show quite detrimental to the task you're going back to.
Yep.
And in this day and age, we've got so many interruptions and shiny lights and all this stuff that, please.
I was going to say, no, you think about it. The poor guys out on site are getting phone calls from everybody left, right and centre. They're not allowed to concentrate on the task at hand. They're constantly getting bombarded with, I need this, I need that, I need this. It's not to say that they shouldn't be, they're not the right people to answer those questions, but just that ease of communication from everybody just makes it hard for guys out on the site to do everything, which is, that they're up for the task, but it just makes it tough. So that's all.
It does. And we are both old enough to know that there was businesses were running without mobile phones and all this stuff, doing these same projects and bigger ones without this instant gratification, instant communication. So a bit of planning goes a long way, doesn't it?
That's right. I was going to say planning. Like I said, that tadpole, front load the work. Don't load them up at the back. For individuals, I was going to say participate. don't be afraid to ask a question. Like, I'm not the guru. I'm not qualified. I'm not smart enough to be a Sparky. So if you're sitting there thinking I'm going to be able to tell you how to do your job safely, wow, that's scary. I can tell you certain things, but not the electrical stuff. So you can learn something from anybody anywhere. So don't also just forget that someone somewhere is going to teach you something that you'll just go bananas. That was like really cool, and it makes my job better. And don't be closed to new ideas and looking at things. Everyone can do a risk assessment, and everyone says, no, I can't. And I'm going, do you go down to the park with your kid? Yep. So what do? You pull up. Don't go near the pond. You'll fall in the pond. Stay away from the swans. Those big kids on the slides are going to hurt you. Stay away from the cars. Look out for that kid down there. He's sneezing. I don't want you catching a cold. All of a sudden, you see your brain actually knows how to do a risk assessment. You just don't know that you know how to do it. So that's the process that you've just got to apply to when you walk on the site. So be involved. Don't sit there and just go, I want to go and do my job. Get there and talk about it, because like I said previously, there's nothing worse than having on somebody's headstone, but I was in the right. Like you're going, oh, I did all the right things. You had to look after me. Yeah, but you're the one who got hurt. So that's the thing. So look at your gear. Do that. Talk to your people around you. Ask questions, Don't be afraid of asking a question. I've always said there's no such thing as a stupid answer with safety. It's a stupid question with safety. It's only stupid answers. If somebody blows you off for an answer with a question that you're genuinely asking, then there's a problem with that person. Either they don't know, or they don't want to share, or there's something else going on. But because if someone asks me a question about doing something safely, I will stop and give them the time, because they've stopped to ask the question. So it's important to them. Yep. So that's what I mean. So there's that sort of stuff.
Absolute last words, like music.
Man, now what is it? It's like,
sorry.
No, it's all right. I'm just laughing and going, last words. Well, I'll sit on my hands then, won't I? It's an awesome industry. Like there's so much that we can do, in the renewable space about where we're going and what we're doing, and it can all be done safely. Like it's a matter of doing what we all know is right to do, and just making sure that the industry stays safe, because at the end of the day, I don't want that ripple happening. Like someone gets hurt, it affects all of us. So just do what you can so it doesn't.
Thanks very much, Aaron. That was a great couple of hours, I believe. As you may have noticed, Aaron and I could talk the leg off a chair, possibly underwater. Hopefully this is all very entertaining, and I'd just like to say stay safe. Keep on up with the renewables. This is such a fantastic industry that we're all in. And see you on the next podcast. And for more information, check out the link below. All right. Thanks very much, Aaron. Cheers.
Thanks.